What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more UFC DFS picks and lineup advice, DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for UFC Singapore, Saturday, August 26th. It's super early in the morning. The slate starts at 5 a.m. So we're putting this video out a little earlier for you so you can digest it. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. Here to break down the Max Holloway Korean Zombie fight and card with Jake the Snake, owner of MMA DFS.com. Jake, I know this week has been perfect for you, right? No issues whatsoever.
Oh yeah, man. I love the 5 a.m. start times. Lose a day at work, get the same amount of work done. It's great, man. Love it.
Absolutely. So, if you have been watching these videos, you know what the deal is, but if you're new, welcome. We're going to break down the main event from a betting and DFS perspective. We'll analyze the one newcomer on the card, talk about his background and what we expect of him in his first walk to the octagon. There are a ton of fighters who have less than 4 fights under their belt in the UFC. Many of them have been losing. So we're going to give some context to their stats, their fight logs with our favorite game, Good Fighter, Bad Fighter. And then we'll finish the show with a fight that you have to target in DFS, our favorite prize picks play, and our stream parlay, which we hit last week. So we got to continue that great momentum at the end of the show. So, Jake, Max Holloway, Korean Zombie, Holloway, the biggest favorite on the card, the highest projection by any projection system, just insane fight logs. Talk to me about how this fight plays out and what we should be doing with it in DFS.
Yeah, man. I mean, everyone knows who Max Holloway is. Somehow, still just 31 years old, despite this crazy run he's been on. He's coming off five. Sorry, let me start over. He's coming off a 5 round decision win over Arnold Allen. A little bit lower scoring in DFS. No surprise there. Arnold Allen really good about not absorbing many significant strikes. Holloway's actually fought to 8 straight 5 round decisions, going 4-4 in those, which doesn't look great until you realize 3 of those losses came against Volk. The other one was against Dustin Poirier, up a weight class, so kind of forgivable. Holloway, I believe he's won his last 17 straight featherweight fights against everyone not named Volk. So that's ignoring the Poirier fight because that was up to 155. So I mean, pretty impressive track record there. But a lot of decisions, 8 straight, 40 rounds of no finishes for Max Holloway here. His last finish came in 2018 in a post round 4 doctor stoppage TKO win over Brian Ortega. So even in that one, it was a doctor stoppage. So basically, this decision machine that just racks up absolutely crazy volume. We saw him put up 445 significant strikes against Calvin Kattar, the most significant strikes ever landed in a UFC fight. And he broke his own record in that one, which he had originally set over Ortega. Holloway's also super durable, never been knocked out. So, I mean, the guy just literally a machine for DFS, one 5 round high volume decision after the next. You can knock him a little bit on the last one, but I think that was kind of predictable when you're going against Arnold Allen, who only averages 2.25 significant strikes absorbed. Tough to put up a big number against that guy, and he still did okay. He scored 89 DraftKings points. He scored better than most people against Arnold Allen, so we'll say that. He's taking on the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung, who's 36 years old. Hasn't fought in 16 months since the early round 4 TKO loss to Volkanovski. Volkanovski absolutely dominated the Korean Zombie in that fight, outlanded him 138-48 in significant strikes. Also landed 4 takedowns and a knockdown. I mean, honestly, I think most people watching that were kind of like, oh, okay, the Zombie might retire now.
Yeah.
And it kind of looked like he was about to afterwards. I mean, it seemed like he was like, all right, well, there goes my title hope. This is what I've been working for my entire life. But he's coming back, a year and a half later. Honestly, I'm a fan of the guy. I think he's good. He's just kind of old, man. He had the whole Korean military service thing that set him back for a while. He spent a few years out of competition. It's really hard. I mean, he did come back and he was solid, but kind of took away some of his best years. It's definitely looking more dead than undead lately. And he's only 5-4 in his previous 9 UFC 5 round fights. So, I mean, just barely over 500 here. He's a guy in DFS, he's going to score well when he wins, but I mean, look at the odds. Like, the rating's kind of on the wall here. Really, really tough spot to win. He's a plus 550 dog. Going to be really tough. He's a Hail Mary play. In low risk, you still stack him just for the value because he's so cheap. And then we look at Holloway from a DFS perspective. This is a great spot for him to land a ton of volume, maybe get his first finish since 2018. We just saw the zombie just get worn down by Volk, and the fight was stopped. It was still standing, but everyone's like, all right, man, stop. Even Volk was like, you sure you want to keep fighting in that fight? Like it was
Yeah.
a bizarre scene, man. So I mean, I think everyone knows what's up. Holloway's going to come in. He's going to land a ton of strikes. The fight may get stopped or it may go 5 rounds. Either way, he's going to put up a big score. He's the most expensive fighter on the slate for a good reason. He can go absolutely nuclear. I think throughout the last 89-point decision victory out the window over Arnold Allen, you go back and look at his previous two, he scored 153 and 209 DraftKings points just from striking. He's not like, he doesn't need to mix in any grappling, just pure striking. I mean, he can put up over 100 significant strikes in a round. I mean, he did that against Cater. It's just absolutely insane volume. Jung averages like 4.35 significant strikes absorbed per minute, which doesn't look like that many. Still like almost twice as much as Arnold Allen. But then you look at his last fight and it was double that against Volk. It's 8.76. And I think that, obviously Volk is the best 145 on the planet, but I think Holloway can hang right there with him in terms of volume. I mean, there's a reason that Holloway has landed more significant strikes than anyone else in the history of the UFC. So really high upside, high floor spot for Holloway. I think he probably leads the slate in scoring on both sites, which he's also going to be the highest owned fighter on both sides. So you really got to look for ways to get unique in this slate if you play Holloway. I mean, if you don't play Holloway, yeah, you can get crazy leverage if somehow he gets left out, but probably not going to happen. So we're probably looking for other ways to get unique outside of playing Holloway. So that's for the high risk, and yeah, for low risk, just stack it and then add 4 more pieces around him.
Right. Okay. Really great breakdown there. I guess the biggest question is obviously the pricing, right? Holloway 9,700, Korean Zombie 6,500, and really, so obviously there are ways he gets left out. Somehow weird stoppage, TKO, Holloway slows down for some reason, somehow loses, right? There are ways he gets left out. More
Sure.
than likely he's going to put up 120 plus points here. The question is, can he get priced out? And really what you're going to have to hope, I think, is either fighters in the mid-range score a lot more and we don't get really many cheap fighters that score well, or we get someone like Nakamura, Aldrich, Bedoya, 2 of those fighters putting up 120 plus. Is that how you see him getting left out, or are there any other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those early round 2, early round 3 stoppages, or like he randomly just like doesn't land a million significant strikes. I mean, the zombie can grapple. He just doesn't do it very often. We saw it against Dan Ige. That's like the one time in the last like decade he's been looking to wrestle. Holloway's got a good takedown defense. So I don't really think it's that way. I mean, yeah, it's got to be something weird. It's got to be something really weird, or like just a terribly timed stoppage in combination with like Nakamura scoring like 130 and another guy on top of that. Like, right, like 2 expensive guys outscore him, and that's how he gets left out basically. Or like you said, I mean, get squeezed out from a bunch of mid-range fighters, which we do have a lot of high upside mid-range fighters. But man, I just feel like the chances of Holloway outscoring everyone by like 30 or more are pretty high.
Yeah, that is rough to think about from a GPP perspective, but if he's going to be, what, 55% owned, what's your projected ownership for him right now?
Yeah, like high 50s, and we've seen him get all the way up to like 70%. So, I mean, I think Nakamura will keep him from getting like 70% owned. I mean, just the price thing, like, it's pretty debilitating. When we see these guys that are over 9,500, a lot of the time they come in a little bit lower projected than we're thinking, just because people want to jam them in. But when you start building 150 lineups, optimizers just can't get as high as
Yeah,
you would want if you were hand building.
that is very true, and I can attest to that from 5 minutes ago when I was trying to do the same thing. So, all right, let's move on. Let's talk about the one newcomer on the card. That is Billy Goff, the 11th fight on the card here. Talking about Billy Goff, Jake, what's his background, strength of schedule, fighting style?
Yeah, so he's coming in, young guy, 25 years old, 8-2 with 6 finishes. He hasn't fought in a year, so he landed a round 1 TKO in Contender Series a year ago, and he said he had a torn meniscus for his last few fights, and then in training he tore his other meniscus, and he got double knee surgery and was out for a year.
Jesus.
So great sign coming into your debut.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really stood out on tape with this guy is he gets dropped all the time in the opening minute of fights. Like his last 3 fights, 2 of them he got dropped in the opening minute, and the third one he got taken down and beat up on the mat for like over half the first round. So it's like, man, he's like constantly finding himself in trouble and then finding ways to come back, which maybe that works on the regional scene. But once you start facing tougher competition, like they're going to be able to put you away after they drop you. They're not going to jump guillotine
Right.
and blow it like some of the guys have been fighting. And you also look at the guys who've been fighting, and there are a bunch of guys that got knocked out on the Contender Series. So Shimon Smutsky, 2 round 1 KO losses on Contender Series. Justin Supner, 2 round 1 KO losses on Contender Series. Sean Lally, 1 KO loss on Contender Series. It's like he's been beating up Contender Series rejects, and now he's facing a guy that actually succeeded on the Contender Series. So I don't know. I mean, you definitely look at the level of competition, and you have to wonder about the guys he's been facing on the New England regional scene with like CES, like the Jay Perrin organization, basically. But he has shown the ability to survive and come back in fights. He's a really aggressive fighter. He likes to wrestle, likes to throw elbows out of the clinch and on the mat. He doesn't really go for any submissions, which is actually good for DFS because he'll just sit there and rack up ground strikes, which is like the cheat code for scoring like 130 points if you get the right ref that won't stop the fight for 5 minutes. So tons of upside, like massive upside. I'm sure he's popping in projections across the industry based on his Contender Series stats because those numbers were crazy, and most people are just going off of that. I mean, obviously, we're going back and we're charting his previous 4 fights and then mixing that in for projections. But I don't think a lot of people are doing that. But either way, I mean, tons of upside. Pretty terrible striking defense. Gets dropped a lot. So super volatile fighter. Gonna make for high upside fights. But I mean, literally 0 point floor and like 140 point ceiling. So definitely a guy that you want to be targeting both sides of in DFS for as long as he's in the UFC. And the wrestling upside is definitely good for DraftKings.
0 point floor, 100+ point upside is the theme of this slate for many fighters. So let's continue on and let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. These are fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC. And just really quickly, Jake's going to say, are they actually good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup this week for DFS? Let's sort by fights here, and we'll start from the first fight of the night. And we have Jarno Aarons in his second fight in the UFC.
Yeah, he's decent. He just gets controlled for large periods of time against people that can grapple. But it's a good matchup because Choi doesn't grapple. Choi's just here to brawl. So sort of a average fighter and a good matchup.
All right, moving on, we have Liang Na in her second fight. Her fight against Carnelossi, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first fights back with crowds, and it was just one of the hypest fights I've seen from a crowd for a prelim fight. And since I've been watching UFC, obviously exciting, but has 2 losses in the UFC. She has 0-2. Is she good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup against JJ Aldrich?
Yeah, so Liang Na is terrible. She has like a 3-minute gas tank and just goes absolutely crazy every time she fights, trying to finish people. But yeah, she just kind of spazzes out for a round and then death gases. She'd be like carried back to the corner at the first fight by Song Yadong. But she's moving up a weight class, so she was fighting at 115, moving up to 125. Maybe that helps her cardio or her chin. I don't know. I'm not really buying it because she fought at 125 for most of her career and she was still doing the same things and still losing basically every time she saw the second round. So I'm going to call her a bad fighter in a bad matchup because JJ Aldrich just makes every fight kind of terrible. And she's been finished twice in the UFC, but she's still tough to finish. Like that was Macy Barber got the TKO against Aldrich and Aaron Blanchfield subbed her, but I think it's a tough matchup to get a finish.
For sure. All right, we talked about Billy Goff already. What about Yusaku Kinoshita in his second fight in the UFC? Got pummeled by Adam Fugit in his debut.
Yeah, here's another guy with like the hole in his game is defensive wrestling. So like he's a good striker, terrible defensive wrestling. So it's like, do you call that a good fighter? I would call that a bad fighter because you're not well rounded enough to beat good opponents. But he's a good striker, and he can capitalize on the fact that Billy Goff has terrible striking defense. So it's definitely a super high upside matchup, great for DFS. But yeah, a developing 23-year-old fighter who definitely needs to fix his defensive wrestling, but high upside on striking.
All right, moving on. We have Ronaldo Bedoya, who I think impressed many people in his debut against Chaos Williams. He's 0-1 in the UFC, now is a favorite here, 9,200 against Song Kanon.
Yeah, it's always funny when you impress people by how many times you can get punched and not get knocked out.
I
But I
thought
mean,
he
yeah,
won.
Chaos
I thought he
Williams.
won the decision. I'll say that. I thought he won the decision.
Yeah, I think it came down to damage, like I don't think he was landing as big of shots as Chaos, but yeah, it's debatable. I
Sure.
mean, he outlanded Chaos in the fight. I had a bet on Chaos, like an idiot, so I was a little biased when I was watching it, but it was a close fight. I don't know, man. I wouldn't have been mad either way. He showed he was durable in there. I just, you don't want to be the Chris Matino guy that takes 200 strikes and everyone's like, "You're so durable," and then you get knocked out by Guido in your next fight
Yeah,
just
true.
because like your chin's gone. So I don't know. I'm not ready to call him a good fighter just because he gets hit so much, but he's a fun fighter. He's a high upside fighter for DFS. And if his durability holds up, then I think we can call him a good fighter. I'm just a little bit concerned if he comes into every fight eating 130 strikes, how long he'll be able to do that for. But for DFS purposes, he is a good fighter and a good matchup.
Yeah, and to that note, when we talked about Bedoya during the week of his debut, we mentioned that he had gotten hit cleanly so many times before the UFC that if Chaos lands one of those punches, then he's likely lights out. Didn't happen, but the striking
Right.
defense still remains. So, all right, moving on. We have another fighter here with one fight in the UFC, Toshiyoma Kazama. He is fighting Garrett Armfield. Both these guys, one fight in the UFC. Again, one fight in the UFC, second fight is the typical spot that we look for. Now they're fighting each other. Armfield has the edge in terms of trends because he was up a weight class in his debut, is now back down to his normal weight class. But Armfield versus Kazama, are these fighters good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for either one?
Yeah, so Kazama's like a one-dimensional grappler. Terrible striking defense. Just came over from grappling. Really doesn't offer anything on the feet. We saw that in his last fight. He got knocked out by Nakamura in like 33 seconds. He also got knocked out in his third most recent fight early in the second round. So literally two of his last three fights, he has been knocked out and completely exposed on the feet. Armfield's a little more well-rounded, so I would say it's a worse matchup from that standpoint. But Armfield has been submitted twice in the past. He gets submitted by Onama in his debut. That was up a weight class. But still, he's been a little bit prone to getting submitted. Does have a wrestling background. So it's not a great matchup for Kazama. And I would say Kazama is not a great fighter. And then on the other side of things, from Armfield's perspective, it's kind of like an average talent. He's not like great anywhere, but he's got decent wrestling, decent striking. And Kazama is so bad on the feet that I would call it a good matchup, at least a high upside matchup. It's a little bit risky from the sense that Armfield could get submitted, but it's definitely got knockout potential. So high upside for both guys, really. But it's kind of a low level fight between a one dimensional grappler and a more well rounded kind of jack of all trades.
And Kazuma, I must say, with the worst possible game plan in the history of mixed martial arts in his debut against Nakamura. So, moving on, we have Lukas Dreski, somehow pronounced Dreski. Two fights in the UFC. He is 0-2. Talk to me about him. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Cortez Acosta?
Yeah, he's like a blown up light heavyweight. He always seems like he's carrying extra weight. He's tall, but he's not like the widest heavyweight. And he seems to gas because of that. Like you can see him getting tired in his fights. And I just feel like he's carrying a bunch of extra weight he doesn't need to. He's decently well rounded. We saw him grapple on the regional scene some. We haven't really seen that in the UFC at all from him. And then, Cortez Acosta is one dimensional striker. So if Lucas comes in and grapples, then it's a decent matchup. But I still think it's kind of not the best matchup ever. I would call Lucas a bad fighter. And if he doesn't grapple, it's going to be a bad matchup because he's probably going to get outstruck on the feet and potentially knocked out.
Fair enough. All right. Next, we have Junior Tafa, who lost his debut after a decorated kickboxing career against Usman. So is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Parker Porter?
This guy is literally the worst wrestler I've ever seen in my entire life. So I can't call him a good fighter. He's got good striking, but that's it. He's one of these guys that just turned pro in MMA like a year ago, and then he comes in, and then you see him on his back, and he's like, he's not even trying to get up. He's just like waiting. You're like, what are you doing, man? So nah, he's a terrible MMA fighter. He's a dangerous striker, and that makes for a volatile matchup here against Parker Porter, who's been very prone to getting knocked out in the first round, but can wrestle. So both guys have a non-existent floor and a high ceiling. So I think whoever wins here should score well. the hope is that we don't get Parker Porter controlling Tafa for the whole first round, and then 5 seconds into round two, Tafa knocks Porter out. I mean, that's kind of the old Bill Rose special that we're trying to avoid anytime you get a striker versus grappler. But it's bound to happen occasionally, but we're not going to avoid these matchups where you have, such a gaping hole in Tafa, like his wrestling defense. I mean, so yeah, I think it's a high upside matchup for both guys to sum that up.
There goes that theme again. All right, and moving on, we have two guys fighting each other with less than 3 fights in the UFC. We have Fernie Garcia and Ringu Nakamura. Is either one of these guys good or bad? Is this a good or a bad matchup, especially for either?
Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. Nakamura is good, and it's a good matchup, and Garcia Fernie is bad, and it's a bad matchup.
Doesn't get much easier than that. Hence Nakamura's gigantic money line and $9,600 price tag on the slate. All right, moving on. Let's close out with the final 3 segments here. Prize Picks Play, Fight the Target, and our stream parlay of the week. You see the promo code at the top here. Use promo code OCCUPY if you have not signed up for Prize Picks yet. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100 on your first deposit. Use that to parlay whatever props you want. Use some UFC props that we suggest that Jake puts out on his site, and parlay with any sports. So Jake, which Prize Picks play stood out to you the most this week?
Yeah, man, I really like Max Holloway over 96.5 significant strikes. Shocking, I know. Yeah, I mean, you just need to avoid the early knockout from Holloway, Like, even his last knockout, which was 5 years ago in 2018, came in round 4, soared past it. So we're really just trying to avoid Holloway getting a finish in the first 2 rounds, and he should hit this pretty easily.
Has not been under 96.5 strikes since 2016, so we can cue that up pretty easily this week. All right, next, Fight the Target in DFS. A lot of ones that are very volatile this week. Which one are you picking out for this video, Jake?
I think the best one is going to be the Kinoshita Billy Goff fight, man. I think whoever wins here is going to score well. I think there are a lot of fights to target. I think a lot of them are going to be pretty popular. I think a lot of people are going to be targeting the Ryan Spann, Anthony Smith fight, the Chidi, Olajaychik fight. So I think this one's the least likely of those 3 to bust. I think that this one, whoever wins, should score well. So yeah,
I like that
flip
one.
that one up.
I like it a lot. I like it a lot. And let's continue and finish with our stream parlay. We've hit 3 of the last 15, which in a vacuum doesn't sound that great, but when you figure that most of the odds are plus 500 or more, we're in the green for the past few months on these stream parlays. So let's continue. Try to go back to back, Jake. I'm gonna that fight you just mentioned, Ryan Spann, Anthony Smith. Cannot get the image of Smith being so washed out of my head in his last fight. I'll go Spann KO plus 195 for my side of the stream parlay.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid, man. The classic rematch where everyone's assuming it's going to go the exact same way as the first one. We've seen how that works out.
Yes.
I'm going to go Mikhail Olajaychik knockout at plus 175. So we get the knockout parlay, and we put those together, and it's going to be plus 711.
Plus 711. Love that number. We'll take that, the knockout parlay. So if you want to ride that and tail us, please do so. And then cheer with us in Discord during the fights. I'm not going to guarantee that I'll be up at 5 a.m., but I will be up at some point in the morning to watch the fights. I'm sure Jake will as well. So OccupyFantasy.com/Discord is where you can join us and chat with us about the fights, sweat them out with us. And that'll do it for the video. If you want more content, all of our content is already up for the week. So OccupyFantasy.com and MMADFS.com. Jake's site, MMADFS.com, has the sheet, breaks down every fight from a betting and DFS perspective. His premium content gives out best bets, more DFS information. His archive has historical slate information. And OccupyFantasy.com, where Jake comes in and writes the plugs, summarizes the slate for you, top plays and lineup strategies. And we have our model, ranks every fighter on the card, and our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 DFS lineups for FanDuel or DraftKings. That'll do it for this video. Thanks for listening. You can follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. I'm at Brian Jester FF. Thank you for watching this video earlier than usual. And hope you wake up at 5 a.m. for UFC Singapore. For Jake, I'm Brian. Thanks and good luck.